They buried me without a body, held a funeral without tears. For 15 years, my son lit candles beside a gravestone with my name on it, never wondering if the dirt below held anything at all. I didn't die. I walked away. I left in silence, carrying only a suitcase and a heartbreak too heavy to speak of. No one called. No one searched. Eventually, they filled the silence with stories. She vanished. She must be dead. She must have given up. But the truth? I lived. I stitched hope into wedding dresses, whispered lullabies to strangers' babies, and learned the art of growing tomatoes in red clay soil. I wasn't waiting to be found. I was becoming someone they no longer knew. And when I returned, just once, just to see, I realized something chilling. They preferred the ghost of me, because the real me had stories that made them uncomfortable, and I was done being quiet. There's something sacred about a kitchen at 6 a.m. The hiss of the kettle, the hum of a refrigerator, the soft clink of a spoon against porcelain. That was my chapel. While the rest of the world slept, I prayed in toast crumbs and coffee grounds, humming to myself as I packed lunch boxes and ironed school shirts. I was a mother. That was the whole truth of me. Caleb wasn't born into ease. His father, Richard, died in a warehouse collapse when Caleb was 5. One moment he was late for dinner, the next he was ashes in a military tin. I remember how Caleb clutched that box like it might speak. I held him through 3 nights of sobbing until he finally asked, "Is Daddy coming back if I'm really good?" And I told him no, because I didn't believe in pretty lies, even then. I became everything overnight. Breadwinner, nurse, homework checker, monster chaser. I worked double shifts at the clinic, cleaned motel rooms on Sundays, and still made it home in time to hear about Caleb's spelling tests. He liked dinosaurs and hated green beans. He called my lasagna magic armor because it made him brave enough to face bullies. I took every scraped knee and bad report card like a medal of motherhood. When he turned 16, I pawned my wedding ring to pay for his guitar. He never knew. He just grinned when he opened the case, eyes wide like the world had handed him permission to dream. I lived for that grin. College came and he went off to Nashville. I cried, but I never let him see. I sent him peanut butter fudge in the mail and whispered to his voicemail, "You're doing great, baby." He called on Sundays less as time passed, but always polite, always grateful. That was enough. That had to be. Then came Nicole. She arrived in a clean white blouse, said hello like she meant goodbye, and kissed Caleb too fast in front of me. I smiled. I baked. I told her I was glad they found each other. She said, "Nice house, very quaint." And Caleb didn't flinch. I gave them my living room, my fridge, my calendar. I was so sure that love given always circles back. But gardens don't always bloom just because you bled planting them. The first time Nicole rearranged my spice cabinet, I laughed. She's just making it easier for herself, I told myself. When she repainted the guest bathroom without asking, I nodded. A woman wants to feel like she belongs. But when she started calling the house their home, something inside me flickered. A tiny match lit in a dark corner I hadn't checked in years. Caleb didn't notice. Or maybe he chose not to. He was busy with work, and Nicole was always planning something. Brunches, renovations, their honeymoon registry, even before the wedding. I stood on the sidelines, offering to help, suggesting venues, but my opinions always met the same tight smile. "Don't worry, Joe, we've got it handled." Joe? She never called me Mom. Just Joe, like a neighbor, or worse, an employee. I tried not to mind. But the day she scheduled the wedding rehearsal at the exact hour I had my physical therapy appointment, one I'd waited 6 weeks for, I knew. I wasn't part of the circle anymore. Still, I baked the lemon bars. Still, I ironed Caleb's shirt for the big day. Still, I stood in the second pew clutching my purse like a life raft while Nicole's mother was introduced as the rock behind the groom. I smiled until my cheeks ached. That night in my bedroom, still untouched, I folded Caleb's boutonniere into a book of Psalms and cried like I hadn't since Richard died. I held on to hope. Maybe, once the wedding rush passed, Nicole would soften. Maybe they'd ask me to babysit someday, let me teach my grandchild how to make bread or sew buttons. I clung to those maybes like threads of silk, so fine, so fragile. Then one morning, I overheard her. I was watering the roses outside the kitchen window. She was on the phone, pacing the tile barefoot, not knowing I was just steps away. "She's still here," Nicole said. "I swear to God, it's like living with a shadow. Caleb won't say anything. He feels guilty. But this can't go on. It's our house now, not hers." Our house, not hers. I dropped the watering can. It clanged against the stone, louder than any slap. Nicole turned, startled. I didn't speak. I walked inside, past her, past the photos, up the stairs. In that moment, I wasn't a mother. I wasn't a woman. I was a ghost they hadn't buried yet. I sat on the edge of my bed for what must have been hours. The house throbbed in silence. From downstairs, I could hear the occasional laugh. Nicole's voice, cheerful and unbothered, drifting up the stairwell like perfume I never wore. Caleb's voice was harder to catch, muffled, hesitant. I used to know every cadence of his speech. Now, it felt like listening through a wall I hadn't built. The photo frames on my dresser stared at me. Caleb, age 7, missing both front teeth, smiling in front of our beat-up Ford. Me holding him the day he graduated nursing school. My eyes puffy, but proud. A picture of Richard and me at our wedding, blurred at the corners from years of sun and dust. I picked that one up, ran a finger across the glass. "You'd know what to say," I whispered. But even Richard felt far away now. That night, I began packing. Not with anger, not even grief, just clarity. I folded clothes into my old duffel bag, a few sweaters, my good shoes, the letter my grandmother wrote me before she passed. I left the rest, furniture, jewelry, memories sealed in wallpaper and floorboards. I wasn't taking the house with me. I was letting it go. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a letter. I addressed it to Caleb. I told him I loved him, that I was proud of him, that I knew this wasn't the life he meant to give me. I wrote, "Sometimes people let go not because they stop caring, but because holding on has become too heavy to carry." I folded it neatly, slipped it into an envelope, and placed it on the kitchen counter, right beside the coffee machine he used every morning. It should have been simple, quiet, my exit, wrapped in grace. But grace, as I learned that night, is easily stolen, because Nicole found the letter first. I saw her reading it from the top of the stairs, standing barefoot under the kitchen light. She didn't cry. She didn't even look confused. She read it like one might read a grocery list, impersonal, irrelevant, and then she tore it in half. No hesitation, no guilt, just a sigh, and the soft whisper, "It's better this way." She tossed it in the trash. I didn't move. I didn't scream. I just turned back to my room, zipped the duffel, and walked out the front door before dawn. No note, no goodbye. Let them think I left without a word, because in the end, that's the only thing they'd hear. Silence. The sun hadn't risen yet when I stepped onto the sidewalk with my bag slung over my shoulder. The air was cold and damp, the kind that clings to your skin and makes you feel smaller. I didn't have a plan. I didn't need one. The only thing I knew was that I couldn't stay. Not one more breath, not one more morning pretending that I still belonged in a house that had learned to breathe just fine without me. I walked to the bus station in my old gray coat, the one with the mended sleeve Caleb never noticed. The clerk behind the counter didn't ask questions when I handed her a 50 and said, "Next ride out of here, North Carolina," the ticket read. That was far enough to vanish, but not so far that I couldn't remember. I took the seat by the window and didn't look back. Not when the town blurred past, not when the sunrise bled over the rooftops, not when the bus pulled away from everything I had ever called home. I wasn't crying, I wasn't angry, I was empty. But sometimes, emptiness is just the space being cleared for something else. I didn't know that yet. All I knew was the sound of the engine, the weight of silence in my lap, and the strange small flutter in my chest that whispered, "You left, and you survived the leaving." At a rest stop, miles away, I tossed my phone in the trash. Not because I didn't want to be found, but because no one was looking. And that, in its own twisted way, made it easier. That night, I checked into a roadside motel under my maiden name, Josephine Ray. The room smelled of stale soap and old carpets, but it was mine. I sat on the bed, opened the window, and let the cold night air fill my lungs. For the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of being needed. For the first time, I didn't wait for a voice to call me Mom. And in the stillness, I didn't feel like I was disappearing. I felt like I was starting to appear. The town of Ash Hollow, North Carolina didn't know me, and I didn't want it to. That was the appeal, being no one. I rented a small room above a bakery where the scent of cinnamon rolls woke me more reliably than any alarm clock. The landlady, Mrs. Halpern, was a widow with 4 cats and poor hearing, which made her the perfect kind of neighbor, kind, distracted, and uninterested in my past. I found a job at a thrift store 2 blocks down. The pay was low, but the rhythm of sorting old things into new stories suited me. Every chipped plate, every faded sweater, every cracked frame had once mattered to someone. And now, in my hands, they were quiet things just trying to be useful again. I understood that. I told everyone my name was Josephine Ray. I told no one where I came from. No one asked. And just like that, I slipped into a life where I didn't have to explain why I flinched when someone said Mom, or why I never answered calls that never came. The silence at first was brutal, not the kind that comforts, the kind that roars inside your chest when you wake up and realize no one in the world is thinking about you. I spent my first month avoiding reflections, mirrors, windows, shop glass. It was easier not to see the woman I'd become, thin-lipped, gray at the roots, hands too still. I filled my days with motion, folding shirts, polishing counters, rearranging books no one would read. At night, I wrote letters, not to Caleb, not to Nicole, to myself. Dear Joe, I would begin. You're still here. You are real. You are more than forgotten. It wasn't therapy. It was survival. I didn't cry. I didn't allow it. Crying suggested something might change, and I didn't believe in that anymore. It was a rainy afternoon when I saw him, Caleb. I had just finished my shift at the thrift store and was crossing the street to buy some bread when I spotted him across the way, standing in the parking lot of a small diner. I froze, my heart thumping so loudly that for a moment I thought the entire street could hear it. He looked the same, taller, thinner perhaps, with the same dark eyes that were always so full of promise when he was a child. His hair was a little longer, a little messier, but his expression was all too familiar, distant, as if the years between us had grown a wall of fog he couldn't quite see through. I didn't move. I wasn't ready to be seen. Not yet. He was talking to a man I didn't recognize. They laughed about something. Perhaps work, perhaps life. Caleb's smile was tight, not the open, carefree one I used to see when he was young. He had become someone who existed, but didn't really live. My stomach twisted. I didn't know why. It was as if the world had shifted on its axis, and I, not Caleb, was the one who had been displaced. Then, without thinking, I turned away. I ducked into the nearest alley, heart pounding, hands shaking as I wiped my face with the sleeve of my jacket. Why had I stopped? Why hadn't I just kept walking? I couldn't answer that. The rain began to fall harder, and I let it wash over me, feeling the cold seep into my bones. I walked quickly through the alley, not caring where I was going, just needing to move, to escape the thought of Caleb, of everything I had lost and tried so hard to forget. But no matter how far I walked, the truth stayed within me. I had hoped for a moment, just a fleeting, foolish moment, that he might look up, might see me, that he might remember me. But that wasn't how life worked, was it? I was already gone, already dead to him, and I had to let that go. I needed to forget Caleb, to stop feeling like my own existence depended on his approval, his affection. The tears didn't come, but the ache was still there, deep and raw, the kind that doesn't disappear, no matter how many years pass. The kind that waits patiently for the moment you least expect, just to remind you that you can never fully outrun the ghosts you leave behind. The next few days passed in a blur, a haze of rain and cold mornings that seeped into my bones, making everything feel muffled. But no matter how many layers I put on, the world kept piercing through. Caleb's face, the sound of his voice, that slight tremor in his hand when he used to reach for me in the night, all of it kept returning like ghosts knocking on my door. I couldn't escape the thoughts, even when I tried. Each night, when I laid my head down on the rough pillow of my small room, the memories came rushing back. How he used to run to me after school, his backpack bouncing against his back as he told me about his day. How we spent hours together, side by side on the porch swing, talking about nothing and everything all at once. My Caleb, so full of dreams, my heart would ache tight and hot, because I realized then that I wasn't even sure who he was anymore. I kept asking myself, what went wrong? The answer was simple but brutal. I went wrong. I had let him go. I had given him everything. Too much. And when he stopped reaching for me, when he stopped looking back, I had nothing left to give. But it wasn't just Caleb. It was Nicole, too. I didn't want to admit it, but she had woven herself into my mind in a way I couldn't ignore. I hated her. I hated how she made Caleb forget about me. I hated how she made me feel like I was the one who wasn't enough, never enough. I ran into her a few days later at the grocery store. She looked exactly the same, perfectly made up, that same cold smile on her face. She didn't see me at first, and I had a moment to breathe, to gather myself. But as I turned to pick up a carton of milk, she was right there blocking my path. "Joe," she said, her voice sugary sweet but with an edge beneath it, "I didn't know you were still around." I forced a smile. "I'm getting used to it." She didn't say anything at first, just looked me over like she was inspecting something she didn't quite recognize. "Caleb still talks about you sometimes," she said, her words sharp despite the politeness. "He says he misses you, but I think he's just being nice." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. "How's he doing?" She shrugged, an exaggerated motion that told me everything. "Fine, I guess. Busy. You know how it is." I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her everything that had been gnawing at me for years. But instead, I stood there, silent, watching her eyes flick over to the cashier and then back at me. I smiled again, but this time, it didn't reach my eyes. "Well, I'll let you get back to your shopping." Nicole nodded, her smile a thin line. "Take care, Joe." And with that, she walked away, leaving me standing in the aisle, the emptiness of it all settling in like dust. She didn't even know what she'd done. She didn't know how deeply she had buried me, how far she had pushed me into the corners of my own life. I thought I had let her go. I thought I had moved on. But now, standing there in the middle of that grocery store, I realized the truth. The damage she had done was something I couldn't run away from. It had settled in the fibers of my skin deep under the surface, and there was no escaping it. The next few weeks dragged on. I kept busy at the thrift store, my fingers working faster, my mind wandering more. There were days when I felt nothing at all, the emptiness almost comfortable, like the quiet between heartbeats. Then there were days when everything felt too loud. Every corner, every face, every glance felt like a reminder that I had let my life slip into the background of someone else's story. I tried to remind myself that I didn't need Caleb or Nicole to feel whole. I tried to convince myself that I had made the right choice by leaving. I told myself I had found peace in the silence of this small town, where no one knew my name, where no one asked me why I had left or why I wasn't fighting for my place in their lives. But peace is a fragile thing. And some days, it shatters into pieces. It happened on a Wednesday, 2 weeks after I ran into Nicole at the grocery store. The day started like any other, rainy, overcast, the kind of day that feels like it's holding its breath. I woke early, as usual, made my coffee, and sat by the window with my journal. I was lost in my thoughts, scribbling down lines that didn't really matter when I heard the knock at the door. At first, I thought it was Mrs. Halpern, the landlady, checking on the cats again. But when I opened the door, I found Caleb standing there. He looked different, older. His face was tired, and the smile he tried to offer me was weak, hesitant. "Hi, Joe," he said softly, like the word was something he hadn't said in years. His eyes flickered, uncertain, before he glanced down at the ground. "Can I come in?" I didn't say anything for a moment. I just stood there, staring at him, my heart pounding in my chest. After all this time, he was here on my doorstep, and I didn't know how to feel. "Please," he added, his voice breaking the silence. I stepped aside, motioning for him to come in. My mind was racing, trying to find the words I needed to say, but nothing came. I closed the door behind him. We stood in the small living room, the air thick with everything we hadn't said. Caleb shifted awkwardly from foot to foot, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his jacket. His eyes never quite met mine. "I didn't know where else to go," he said finally, his voice so small I almost didn't recognize it. "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About you." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on me, but I didn't speak. I couldn't. "I'm sorry, Joe," he whispered, his voice catching. "I'm sorry for what I did, for how I let everything fall apart." The words hung in the air like smoke. His apology didn't feel like a fix. It felt like a crack in the dam. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened. "I've been so lost these last few years," he continued, his eyes finally meeting mine. "With Nicole, I thought I was doing the right thing, but I wasn't. I was so selfish. And now, I don't know how to make it right." The silence stretched between us. My heart was heavy in my chest. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, wasn't it? The moment when Caleb would apologize, when he would realize that I wasn't just a mother who had disappeared. I wasn't just a footnote in his life. But as he stood there, waiting for something, anything from me, I realized the truth. The damage had already been done. I could forgive him. I could even love him again. But I would never be the same. Not after everything. Not after all the years of pretending that the silence was just temporary. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said quietly, my voice surprising even myself. "But I'm glad you're here, Caleb. I'm glad you found me." His face fell. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he whispered, "but I needed you to know. I needed you to know that I didn't forget you." And then, just like that, everything shifted. The walls I'd spent so many years building around my heart started to crack. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was free. The days following Caleb's visit passed in a strange, heavy quiet. I didn't know what to expect from him, from myself. His apology had cracked something open inside me, but it wasn't a wound that could be healed so easily. He had shown up, yes, but he hadn't fixed anything, and I knew deep down that he couldn't. Still, I thought about him. I thought about the boy I raised, his face full of wonder, asking me why the sky was blue, why the rain felt like a hug, why things that weren't supposed to change kept changing anyway. I thought about his small hands in mine when he fell off his bike, the way he trusted me with his fears, his dreams. I thought about how, as a child, he never once asked for anything I couldn't give. He believed in me with such quiet faith that it felt like my love was his oxygen. And now, all those years later, I was standing here, unsure of where he'd gone. I didn't see him again right away. I didn't expect to. But every time I stepped out of my apartment, every time I went to the grocery store or walked down Main Street to pick up a book from the second-hand store, I wondered if I might see him again. What would I say to him? What would he say to me? I never expected the knock on my door. I was in the middle of making a batch of homemade soup when it came. The sound was hesitant at first, a quick tap, almost like it was testing if I was really there. My heart jumped in my chest. I wasn't prepared to see Caleb yet, not like this. I wiped my hands on my apron, set the spoon down, and slowly walked to the door. When I opened it, it was him again. His face still tired, but his eyes holding something different this time. Something I hadn't seen the last time, determination. It looked like he had finally stopped running from something. "Hi, Joe," he said quietly. "I know it's been a while. Can we talk?" I stepped aside wordlessly. I didn't have a plan for this moment. I didn't have a script for the reunion I hadn't really prepared for. He followed me into the small living room, his movements still unsure, but there was something softer about him this time, more real. "I've been thinking," he started, looking around the room like he was seeing it for the first time. I didn't understand what I was doing, what I had. I think I always thought you would just be there, like I took it for granted that you would always be there. I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. How do you respond to something that feels like an apology without being an apology? Something that feels like an admission of guilt, but not quite. "I was stupid," he continued, his voice growing stronger. "I thought I could have everything, Nicole, my life, my job, and still have you waiting for me. Like you'd just be there even if I wasn't. But that's not fair, Joe. It was never fair." I could feel my breath catch in my chest. This was the conversation I had dreamed of having for years, the one I thought would fix everything. But now, faced with it, I realized something. It wasn't enough. I hadn't just lost Caleb. I had lost a version of myself, too. The version that believed the best in him, that believed family always came back together, no matter how much time passed. I had spent so many years trying to keep a part of myself tied to him, and now I was looking at a man I didn't know, trying to force something back into place that had been broken long ago. "Joe, I know I hurt you. I know I made mistakes," Caleb said, his voice almost pleading now. I held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "You don't need to keep apologizing, Caleb. It's not about that anymore." He blinked, his face confused. "Then what is it about?" I let out a slow breath. "It's about what I need too, what I've needed for so long." I didn't say anything more. I didn't need to. The silence between us was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was the first time in a long time that I had spoken my truth without hesitation. And Caleb didn't argue. He didn't try to fill the space with words. For the first time in years, I felt like I was breathing again. The days after Caleb's second visit were quieter than I expected. I hadn't seen him again, and I didn't know if I was waiting for something or if I had already come to terms with the idea that he had said what he needed to say. I had a tendency to overthink, to turn everything over in my mind, and perhaps this was one of those times when silence was my only ally. But the silence wasn't comforting anymore. It felt like an old friend who overstayed their welcome. A constant reminder that there was something unfinished between us, something that couldn't be patched up with words or apologies. Caleb's admission, his acknowledgement of his mistakes, should have meant more, but it didn't. It was like a distant echo, something that no longer had a place in the present. I found myself wondering if I'd made a mistake by letting him in at all. Was I just fooling myself into thinking that I could rebuild something with him when the foundation had already crumbled long ago? Could I really forgive him after everything that had happened? There were mornings when I felt like the weight of the past had finally caught up with me. I'd sit at the kitchen table sipping my coffee, and the emptiness of it all would settle around me. The apartment, small and simple, had become a strange sort of sanctuary, but it also felt like a cage. I realized that I had built this life around my wounds, avoiding confrontation, avoiding the truth, and convincing myself that I was living without regrets. I had spent so many years in the shadow of Caleb's absence, giving and giving until I had nothing left, that I didn't know who I was anymore. I wasn't the woman who raised him. I wasn't the woman who had dreamed of him growing up to be something better than I could ever imagine. I had become a stranger to myself. I wandered around the apartment, picking up things I didn't need, organizing things I wasn't sure I even wanted. I wasn't sure what I was searching for. Was it answers, or was it just a way to fill the silence? It was on one of those quiet afternoons that I found it. It was a small, worn notebook I'd kept tucked away in the back of my closet. It had been buried under old sweaters, and I hadn't thought about it in years. I pulled it out, dusted it off, and flipped through the pages. It was filled with memories of Caleb's first steps, his first words, his first heartbreak. I had written everything down in that notebook as a way to hold on to him, to capture every fleeting moment that made him mine. The last page was blank, and suddenly I felt a deep, painful emptiness. I didn't know what to write anymore. There was no more room for memories that didn't fit. No more stories of the child I had loved so fiercely. The person who had once been my whole world was gone, and all that was left were fragments of the past. I closed the notebook and set it aside. I didn't cry. I didn't have tears left for him anymore. I went to the window, looking out at the gray sky, the world moving on, indifferent to my heartache. The rain had started again, soft and steady, just like the ache in my chest. I felt as though I were standing at the edge of a cliff, looking out at the void below, uncertain of whether to take the leap or stay grounded in the past. But the truth was, I wasn't sure if I was ready to let go. I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to face the unknown, to move on without the hope of Caleb ever truly seeing me again. I wasn't ready for that final goodbye. The days grew heavier, and yet I moved through them as if I were floating just above the ground. Life here, in Ash Hollow, had become a quiet sort of survival. I had made peace with the solitude, or so I thought. The small town's hum became my background music, the thrum of normalcy that kept me from drifting too far. I kept to myself, worked my shifts at the thrift store, and began to lose track of time. But there were moments, brief flashes, when the past would come crashing back, uninvited. It happened one morning, as I was sorting through an old pile of books at work, when I found a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. It was well worn, its cover curling at the edges, the pages soft and yellowed. I smiled faintly. Caleb had loved this book. It had been one of his favorites back when he was a teenager, the first book that made him feel like someone understood him. I ran my fingers over the title. I could still remember the day he handed it to me, wide-eyed and eager, and said, "You need to read this, Mom. It's like everything that's wrong in the world, but somehow it makes sense." I had read it, of course, but his words stayed with me long after the pages had closed. How had it come to this? How had the boy who once sought my approval become a man who couldn't be bothered to pick up the phone or look me in the eye? I hadn't seen Caleb in almost a month, and the silence was beginning to gnaw at me. His absence was as loud as his presence had once been. Was he really trying? Or had he just moved on like I had once feared? The thought tightened in my chest, the familiar ache blossoming into something sharp and unbearable, and that's when I realized I hadn't moved on. Not really, not entirely. I had spent so many years living in the shadows of what once was, wishing for what could have been, that I hadn't allowed myself to truly live. I had given everything I had to Caleb, to Nicole, and somewhere along the way, I had forgotten that I was someone too, that I needed something beyond forgiveness, beyond closure. I needed me. For the first time in years, I asked myself, what do I need? The answer was simple. I needed to let go. I needed to stop clinging to the idea that my worth was tied to Caleb's love or Nicole's acceptance. I had given them everything for so long, but I couldn't keep sacrificing myself, expecting someone else to fill the empty spaces inside of me. It wasn't their fault. It wasn't even mine. It was just time for me to move on from the ghosts I'd been carrying. I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of that realization settle around me like a warm blanket. It was a hard truth, but it was necessary. I had to forgive myself for not being enough, for not being able to fix what was broken. I stood up from my stool in the thrift store, my hands trembling slightly, but my heart lighter than it had been in months. I wasn't going to wait anymore. Not for Caleb, not for anyone. I had spent too long waiting for a love that wasn't coming back, a family that wasn't what I had hoped for. The love I needed most was the love I had to give myself. And for the first time, I felt the shift inside me. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't just someone who had been left behind. I was a woman who had given everything she had. And it was time to start giving to herself. The decision to stop waiting for something that wasn't coming wasn't easy. It wasn't something I could decide in a moment, even though that's how it felt. It was more like a slow, inevitable pull toward the truth I'd been running from for far too long. And when I finally acknowledged that truth, I realized how much time I had spent punishing myself for things outside my control. I was never going to be able to force Caleb to be the son I had imagined. I could never change the woman Nicole had become in my life, nor could I resurrect the family I thought we could be. But I could change the story I told myself. I could choose to stop measuring my worth by the love of people who had already made their choices. I could choose to build something else, something new. The first step in that process came a week after my realization. I was walking to the bakery when I saw an old acquaintance, Emma Walker, the librarian who lived 2 streets over. She'd always been kind, but we'd never really spoken beyond pleasantries. I had seen her in passing at the market or during community events, but that was it. "Joe!" she called, waving from across the street. "I haven't seen you around much lately." I smiled, feeling a little embarrassed for hiding in the shadows of my own life. "I've been keeping to myself," I said, my voice lighter than I expected. "Well, we've got a book club meeting tomorrow night," Emma said, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "You should come. It'll be fun, I promise." I hesitated. A part of me wanted to say no. I was comfortable in my cocoon. I had built walls, and they had kept me safe. But as I stood there watching Emma's hopeful face, I realized something I hadn't acknowledged in a long time. I was still hungry for connection. The fear of rejection, of feeling out of place, gripped me for a moment, but I shook it off. What was the worst that could happen? A room full of people who didn't know me? A few awkward moments. It wasn't as terrifying as the empty space I had been living in for the past year. "I think I'll come," I said, surprising myself with the confidence in my voice. Emma beamed, and before I knew it, I was walking home with a new sense of purpose. The next evening, I arrived at the small community center, my hands slightly trembling, but my heart racing with excitement. I had no idea what to expect, and that's what made it feel like a new beginning. The room was filled with people from the town, some familiar faces, some strangers. They greeted me with smiles, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. I was just Joe. Not someone's mother, not someone's ghost. Just a woman with stories of her own. As the evening unfolded, I realized how much I'd been missing. I laughed with people I'd never talked to, shared thoughts on books I had never read, and discovered the warmth of a community that was, in many ways, still growing. And for the first time, I allowed myself to be part of something again. I allowed myself to be seen. When the meeting ended, Emma walked with me to the door. "I'm glad you came," she said softly. I nodded, feeling a smile tug at my lips. Me too. That night, as I lay in bed, I didn't think about Caleb or Nicole. I didn't think about the past, or what I had lost. I thought about the people I had met, about the new connections I was starting to build, and for the first time in months, I slept soundly, not haunted by memories, but by the possibility of what could still be. The weeks that followed Emma's book club meeting passed like a new chapter in a book I had never thought to write. I became a regular at the small community center. Every Wednesday night, I sat with people who just months ago had been strangers. But now, I was no longer just Joe, the woman who had been forgotten. I was a friend, a listener, a participant. The world around me felt full again, in a way I hadn't experienced in years. I started to look forward to the little things, like the smell of fresh coffee from the bakery in the mornings, the way the sun caught the edges of the leaves on trees in the fall, and the sound of children's laughter echoing through the streets. It wasn't the life I had imagined for myself. It wasn't the life I had planned when I had Caleb and Nicole, when I thought that my world would revolve around them forever. But it was my life now, and I had decided to live it. not as a shadow of what could have been, but as something that had its own worth, its own rhythm. One afternoon, as I was walking home from the library, I saw a familiar face in the distance. It was Caleb. He was standing outside the diner, his back turned, and I wasn't sure if he saw me or not. My heart skipped, and I hesitated for a moment. I had been so focused on finding myself again that I hadn't thought much about him. But seeing him now, after everything, brought everything rushing back. I took a deep breath and walked toward him. There was no running from this, no hiding anymore. He turned when he heard my footsteps, and for the first time in a long while, his eyes softened with something other than guilt. Maybe it was surprise. Maybe it was something else. "Joe," he said, his voice hesitant but warm. "I didn't expect to see you here." I smiled, though I could feel the weight of years between us. "Life's funny like that," I said, my tone light but firm. "You never really know where you'll end up." He nodded slowly, taking a step forward. "I've been meaning to talk to you," he said, his voice quieter now. "I don't know how to start, but I've been trying to figure things out, and I realized something." I didn't say anything. I just looked at him, waiting. "I never asked you how you were doing, Joe. I never asked about your life, about what you needed. I took everything for granted, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for that." The words were simple, but they landed with a weight I hadn't expected. I didn't know if I was ready to forgive him. I didn't know if I even could. But hearing him say that, hearing him take responsibility, something inside me shifted. "You didn't ask," I said softly, "but it's not just about asking, Caleb. It's about seeing. It's about understanding." He nodded again like he understood the weight of what I was saying. And for the first time, I saw the man he had become. Not the boy who had once relied on me to fix everything, but a man who was ready to take responsibility, who was ready to understand. "I've been trying to do better," he said quietly. "I've been going to therapy. I've been trying to be better for myself, for Nicole, for Bella and Mason." I looked at him for a moment, unsure of what to say. The man standing before me wasn't the Caleb I had raised. He wasn't the boy who would run to me for comfort when the world was too hard. But maybe, just maybe, he could be the man I would learn to trust again. "I'm glad you're trying," I said finally. "But Caleb, trying isn't enough. Not anymore. I've spent too many years being your backup plan. I've spent too many years pretending like my worth is tied to you." He took a step back, his face falling with the weight of my words, and in that moment, I realized I wasn't the woman who had waited for him to change anymore. I wasn't the woman who had built my world around him. "I can't be what you want me to be," I said softly, "and I can't be who I used to be, but I'm here, and I'm trying to be something new." Caleb looked at me for a long time, his eyes searching mine for something, maybe for forgiveness, maybe for understanding, but I didn't have an answer for him. Not yet. "Maybe one day, Joe," he said quietly. "Maybe one day we can start again, on our own terms." I nodded, feeling the heaviness in my chest lighten just a little. Maybe this was the beginning. Maybe not for us, not yet, but for me, for the life I was building, the person I was becoming. As I walked away from Caleb, I realized something important. I had been afraid of the silence, of being alone, but now the silence was mine. It was my space, my sanctuary, and it didn't belong to anyone else. The next few weeks were quieter. The weather in Ash Hollow started to warm, the air carrying the scent of blooming flowers and fresh grass. People who hadn't noticed me before started to acknowledge me, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was part of something that wasn't based on my role as a mother or a caretaker. I spent my mornings at the bakery, sipping coffee and reading the newspaper, and my afternoons at the community center. I had joined a few new groups, painting, gardening, and even a small book club that met on weekends. It was a new rhythm, a new kind of life I had never imagined for myself, but somehow it fit. In the past, I would have called Caleb every weekend, checking in, making sure he was okay. I would have worried over every little detail, over every argument or sign of disconnection. But now, as the days passed, I realized how much quieter my life had become without those constant anxieties. The stillness felt like a gift, a slow return to myself. One day, while I was volunteering at the community garden, Emma found me. She was holding a cup of coffee in her hand, the steam curling up like tendrils in the morning light. "Joe," she called, her voice warm and inviting. "I've been thinking about the garden project. It's growing so well, and I was wondering if you'd like to take on a bigger role. We could use someone with your experience." I glanced up from the row of freshly planted lavender and smiled. "Bigger role? I don't know if I'm the right person for that." Emma sat beside me, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "You're exactly the person we need. You've been here longer than anyone, and you've got that quiet wisdom, you know? I think you could bring something special to this place." I felt a swell of warmth spread through me. The last time someone had asked me to take charge of something, I had been too focused on my own fears to notice. I had always been the one who followed, never the one who led. But here, in Ash Hollow, I felt like I could breathe. I could make choices that were mine, not because I was expected to, but because I wanted to. "I'll think about it," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. But the words were real. I could see myself taking this on, helping this town flourish, helping myself flourish. Over the next few weeks, I found myself taking more responsibility at the community center. I organized a few weekend workshops on sustainable gardening and even began offering advice to newcomers about the best ways to grow herbs and vegetables. The more I taught, the more I learned. I felt a sense of pride in watching the garden bloom, just as my own life was starting to do. But even as my life began to feel fuller, I couldn't ignore the space where Caleb once was. His absence still left a gap in my heart, though it wasn't the sharp, aching pain it had been before. It was quieter now, more like a soft hum of regret that reminded me of what had been lost, but also what I had found again. And then, on a Thursday afternoon, Caleb showed up again. He knocked on my door, the same way he had the first time, but this time I wasn't waiting for him to change my life. I wasn't waiting for the apology or the closure. I had already started to move on, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to welcome him back into my world. "Joe," he said softly, looking more tired than I had seen him in a long time. "I just wanted to come by and see how you were doing." I stood in the doorway for a moment, just looking at him. The boy I had once held in my arms was standing before me as a man who was still learning what it meant to be himself. "I'm doing well, Caleb," I said with a gentle smile, stepping aside to let him in. "Better than I thought I would be." He took a step forward, his face a mixture of uncertainty and hope. "I've been thinking a lot about everything, and I know I can't fix things overnight, but I want to try. I want to be part of your life again if you'll let me." I nodded, though the words didn't come right away. I wasn't ready to forgive him completely. I wasn't even sure I wanted to. But I had learned something important in the time I had been away from him. I had to let him come to me in his own time. I had to let him earn a place back in my life, but on my terms. "I'm not sure where we'll go from here," I said, my voice steady. "But I'm glad you're trying. I'm glad you're here." We didn't say much more. We didn't need to. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with the knowledge that things were changing, slowly but surely. And maybe that was enough for now. Caleb's presence in my life had always been like a storm on the horizon. Either it was on its way or it had just passed, leaving behind a trail of emotional debris I had to clean up. But this time, things felt different. The weight of our past wasn't gone, but it wasn't crushing me either. I had learned over the last few months to stand on my own, to take up space without apologizing. And yet, there was something that still tugged at my heart when I looked at him. Maybe it was the child in me that couldn't quite let go, or the mother who would always want to make things right for him, no matter the cost. I didn't know, but as Caleb started coming around more often, stopping by for coffee, helping me with the garden, or just sitting with me in silence, I realized something important. The only person I had ever been waiting for was myself. I no longer needed Caleb to complete me. I didn't need him to fix everything I had lost or to undo the mistakes he had made. I had already started the process of healing on my own, and it was empowering. But that didn't mean I didn't feel conflicted. When Caleb came by to help with the gardening, I couldn't help but notice how much he had changed. He seemed more grounded, more present, and even though he hadn't said much about it, I could sense that he was doing the work. He was learning how to live with the choices he had made and how to be more than just a man running away from his past. For the first time in years, he wasn't trying to escape. "You've really turned this place into something special," Caleb said one afternoon, looking around at the flourishing garden. "I didn't think it would look this good when we first started." I smiled, dusting off my hands as I stood up from planting a row of tomatoes. "You've been a big help," I said softly, "but this place, it's my project. For the first time, I'm doing something just for me, not for anyone else." Caleb was silent for a moment, his eyes studying the flowers around us. "I'm proud of you, Joe," he finally said, his voice full of sincerity. "I don't think I ever truly saw how much you gave up for me, for everything. I don't think I ever really saw you until now." I didn't know what to say to that. I wanted to say something that would make everything okay again, that would ease the pain I still carried inside. But I knew that wasn't how healing worked. It wasn't about saying the right things. It was about allowing space for the rawness to exist. We stood there for a few moments, the only sound between us the rustling of the leaves in the gentle breeze. Caleb took a deep breath and looked up at me. "I don't know where this goes, Joe," he said, his eyes searching mine, "but I want you to know that I'm here. I'm here for you, however you need me." For a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond. I had spent so much of my life waiting for this moment, for him to finally see me, to finally understand. But in that quiet moment, I realized something crucial. I didn't need him to fix anything anymore. I didn't need him to apologize or to make up for the years lost. I had made peace with the fact that things had changed. What mattered now was that I had found my voice again, and that was something I had never expected. "You're here, Caleb," I said, my voice steady, "and that's enough. For now, that's all I need." I could see the relief in his eyes, and it made me realize that I had done something even more important than healing my own wounds. I had given him permission to stop carrying the weight of his past mistakes, too. Later that evening, after Caleb left, I sat on the porch and watched the sun set behind the mountains. I thought about how much I had changed in such a short time. A year ago, I would never have imagined that I would find peace without Caleb. But here I was, standing in my own light, knowing that I was enough on my own. The garden, the friendships I had cultivated, and the new life I was building were all reflections of that truth. I had learned that healing wasn't a destination. It was a process. And in this quiet town, surrounded by new beginnings and new possibilities, I was learning to bloom again. It had been a few weeks since Caleb's last visit. Things had settled into a quiet rhythm that I had come to embrace. Life in Ash Hollow had a way of moving gently, like the seasons shifting from one to the next without warning. My garden flourished, my social circles grew, and for the first time in years, I found peace in the daily routine. But even in the calm, there were moments of doubt. It wasn't that I missed the old version of my life with Caleb. No, I had come to realize that the version of myself I had lost, who I was in the midst of being everything for everyone else, was gone. And while I mourned that version of me, I was also grateful for the woman I had become. One evening, as I was preparing for another community meeting, I stood in front of the mirror, looking at the reflection that felt like a stranger, and yet somehow felt like home. The wrinkles around my eyes were more pronounced, the hair more silver than it had been years ago, but the woman staring back at me wasn't weak. She wasn't someone to be pitied. She was strong, resilient, someone who had learned to stand tall in her own space. The knock at the door startled me. I hadn't expected anyone, and for a moment, I debated whether or not I should answer, but something inside me urged me to. I opened the door slowly, and there, standing in front of me, was Caleb. He looked different. There was no guilt in his eyes now, no urgency, just a quiet resolve. "Joe," he said, his voice steady, "I've been thinking. I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry. For everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to let me back into your life completely, but I want you to know that I've been working on myself, and I'm here now because I care about you. And I don't want to keep living with the regret of not saying that." I didn't know how to respond. The old me, the one who had spent years waiting for him, would have rushed to embrace him, to offer forgiveness without hesitation. But I wasn't that person anymore. I had learned the hard way that forgiveness, especially when it was self-inflicted, couldn't be rushed. "I've spent a long time making peace with things, Caleb," I said softly, meeting his gaze. "I don't know where we go from here, but I've realized something important. I can't wait for you to fix things for me anymore. I can't wait for anyone to fix me. I've had to do that on my own." Caleb stood there in silence, his expression unreadable, before he nodded slowly. "I understand. I never wanted to be the reason you lost yourself, and I'm sorry it took me this long to see that." The words hung in the air, heavy but full of something unspoken. Growth perhaps on both of our parts, but it didn't feel like an end. It didn't feel like a perfect conclusion to our story, but it felt like we were finally at a place where we could start writing something new. "I'm glad you're here, Caleb," I said quietly, "but I need you to understand something. I don't need you to complete me. I'm not the same person I was when you left, and I'm not waiting for you to fix me anymore." He smiled, a soft, bittersweet smile. "I don't think I ever could fix you, Joe, but I think I've learned that I don't need to. You're stronger than I ever realized." The warmth in his voice made my heart ache, but in a way that felt gentle, not painful. Maybe that was what healing truly felt like, the ability to stand on your own, knowing that the love you need doesn't have to come from someone else. We stood there for a long moment, neither of us saying anything, just feeling the weight of everything we had been through. There was no need for grand gestures. There was no need for closure. What mattered now was that we had both found a way to live our lives, separately, but with a sense of understanding that hadn't existed before. "I'm happy for you, Joe," Caleb said finally. "I can see how much you've grown. I hope you know that no matter what. I'm proud of you." "I know," I whispered, my voice thick with emotion, "and I'm proud of you too." With that, he turned to leave. There was no fanfare, no dramatic goodbye, just a quiet understanding that we had both moved forward, and that, in itself, was enough. As I closed the door behind me, I felt a peace settle deep in my chest. I had let go of the past. I had let go of the idea that my worth was tied to Caleb, to Nicole, to anyone else. I had learned, finally, to bloom where I was planted, with or without their approval. And as the days passed, I kept growing, learning, loving, living. The garden flourished, the town continued to change, and I, too, was changing. The weeks following Caleb's visit were transformative in ways I hadn't expected. I found myself revisiting everything that had brought me to this point, not as an act of reliving the past, but as a means of understanding the woman I had become. I had begun to realize that the pieces of my life, scattered and broken for so long, were finally coming together. I wasn't waiting for someone else's approval anymore. I wasn't allowing myself to shrink for anyone or to apologize for taking up space in a world that often demanded silence. I had started living for me, with no one else's expectations weighing me down. The community center had become my anchor. It was no longer just a place to pass the time. It had become a part of me. The relationships I had forged there, with people who saw me not as a widow, not as a mother, but simply as Joe, filled me with a sense of belonging I had never fully appreciated before. Emma, who had become a dear friend over the past few months, invited me to join her for coffee one afternoon. We sat in the corner of the local cafe, the windows cracked open to let in the warm breeze, and I found myself talking about things I hadn't allowed myself to voice out loud in years. "You're doing great, Joe," Emma said, her eyes kind and wise. "But I can see you're still holding something back. What's really going on with you? I know you've come so far, but I think there's still a piece of you that's waiting." I looked down at my coffee cup, swirling the liquid absent-mindedly. "I think I'm still figuring it out. I'm learning how to live for myself, to not be defined by others' needs or expectations. But there's this nagging part of me that wonders if I'm enough without all of that." Emma was quiet for a moment, watching me with a gentle understanding that only a true friend could possess. "Joe, you've always been enough, whether you were a mother, a wife, or anything else. And now you're discovering the truth, that you don't need anyone to complete you. You're whole on your own." Her words felt like a balm to the raw parts of me that still didn't believe it. But there was something in her voice, something so certain and true that it made me believe for the first time that maybe I was. Maybe I was enough, just as I was. As I left the cafe, I couldn't help but notice how different everything felt now. The small town didn't feel stifling anymore. It felt like a canvas, ready for me to paint my own story. I had always been afraid of being alone, of facing the world without the roles I had built my life around. But the more I embraced this new life, the more I realized that solitude didn't have to be a punishment. It was a freedom, a space for me to reconnect with myself in ways I hadn't even known I needed. It was on one of these long, reflective walks through town that I stumbled upon something unexpected. A small antique shop on the corner of Maple and 3rd, one I had passed 100 times but never noticed. Something drew me in. I pushed open the door and a small bell chimed, announcing my arrival. The shop smelled of old wood and aged paper, the air thick with history. The owner, an elderly woman with silver hair and a smile that seemed to have seen the world, looked up from her counter. "Welcome," she said, her voice soft but warm. "Is there anything I can help you find today?" I smiled, the weight of my steps seeming to lighten as I walked further into the store. "I'm just looking around," I said, my voice low, almost to myself. "I've always wanted to have a place like this, where memories are kept." The woman nodded knowingly. "We're all just caretakers of memories, my dear. Some of them are ours to keep, others are meant to be passed along." Something in her words stirred something deep within me. I had spent so many years holding on to the memories of the past, trying to keep them intact as though they could be preserved forever. But in that moment, I understood that memories weren't meant to be kept in a box, locked away. They were meant to evolve, to be transformed into something new. I walked through the aisles, running my fingers over the various antiques, old photographs, tarnished jewelry, forgotten books, and I realized that the life I had been living had been much like one of these forgotten items, buried under dust, hidden away, forgotten by the world. But it was time to dust it off, to give it new life, and let it be seen again. In the weeks that followed my visit to the antique shop, something inside me began to shift. It wasn't just about the shop or the trinkets I had bought for no reason other than the fact that they felt like they had a story. No, it was more than that. I realized that, like those forgotten antiques, I too had stories buried deep within me. Stories of who I was before I became the person I had forced myself to be for others. The life I had built in Ash Hollow was starting to feel like more than just a refuge. It was a canvas. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready to paint on it. I started small. I joined a local pottery class, something I'd always wanted to try but had never allowed myself the time for. The first time I sat down at the wheel, my hands trembled slightly, unsure of what I was doing. But as the clay began to take shape under my fingers, something clicked. It was like I was shaping not just the clay, but my own heart. I could mold it into something new, something beautiful. And I didn't have to ask anyone for permission. By the end of the first month, I had made a few simple bowls and vases. They weren't perfect by any means, but they were mine. And that felt powerful in a way I had never experienced before. The next step came naturally. I started writing again. My writing had been something I had put on hold for years, a hobby that had once brought me joy, but had fallen by the wayside when life took over. I dusted off my old journals and began jotting down thoughts, memories, fragments of stories that had been floating around in my mind for years. It wasn't much at first, just short musings, really. But with each word, I could feel something inside me heal. Writing gave me a voice I hadn't realized I'd lost. It allowed me to speak in a way I hadn't been able to in the chaos of raising Caleb and Nicole, of being the pillar of my family's foundation. I wasn't just telling my story, I was living it. One evening, after a particularly successful pottery class, I was sitting at the kitchen table, scribbling in one of my notebooks, when my phone buzzed. I looked down to see a text from Emma. "Hey Joe, would you be interested in sharing your writing at the next community open mic? It's a small group, just a few people from the book club and some of the regulars. I think your voice would be perfect for it." At first, I was taken aback. Sharing my writing felt like exposing the most vulnerable part of myself. But then, as I thought about it more, I realized that this was exactly what I had been avoiding all these years, putting myself out there, stepping into the light. I hadn't written for an audience, let alone for people who might not know me, but the idea of sharing my voice, of saying, "This is who I am," felt empowering. I texted Emma back. "I'll do it. I think it's time to share my story." The night of the open mic, I was nervous. I walked into the small cafe, which was buzzing with quiet chatter and the clinking of coffee cups. It was a cozy setting, filled with soft lights and mismatched chairs. As I scanned the room, I saw some familiar faces, people from the garden club, the pottery class, even a few neighbors I hadn't spoken to in years. Emma spotted me from across the room and waved me over. "Joe, I'm so glad you came. Just get comfortable and we'll start in a few minutes." I nodded, trying to calm my nerves. The thought of speaking in front of people was always intimidating, but tonight was different. This wasn't about impressing anyone. It wasn't about proving anything. It was about reclaiming a part of myself I had hidden for far too long. When my turn finally came, I stood up and walked to the small podium at the front of the room. My hands shook slightly as I adjusted the microphone, and I could feel the weight of the room's attention on me. "I'm Joe," I began, my voice soft but steady. "And I've spent most of my life being someone else's story. But tonight, I'm going to share my own." I paused for a moment, gathering my thoughts. I didn't have a script, didn't have a plan. I just let the words come. I've been a mother, a wife, a friend. I've given pieces of myself to people who needed me. But in doing so, I lost who I was. I stopped writing, stopped dreaming. I let myself become defined by the roles I played instead of the person I truly am. But it's time for me to stop hiding. Time for me to tell my own story, to say that I am more than the sum of my past. I glanced up at the small crowd in front of me. I didn't see judgment in their eyes. I saw something I hadn't expected. Understanding. "I'm learning to love myself again," I continued. "To live for myself, not for anyone else. And I'm starting with the things that make me happy, writing, pottery, the people I meet along the way. I don't know where this journey will take me, but for the first time in years, I'm not afraid of it." I finished my story with a deep breath, feeling lighter, freer than I had in a long time. The room was silent for a moment, and then slowly the applause began. It wasn't loud or overwhelming, but it was enough. It was more than I had ever expected. That night, I went home with a heart full of gratitude. It wasn't just the applause or the approval, it was the feeling of finally being seen, of seeing myself for who I truly was. The night of the open mic had felt like a turning point in my life. I had shared a piece of myself that I didn't even know was still there, hidden beneath the weight of years spent in the background of everyone else's story. But as the applause died down and I made my way back to my seat, I realized that I wasn't just telling my story. I was living it. The next few weeks after the open mic were filled with a new sense of purpose. I had gone from simply existing to fully participating in my own life, and it felt exhilarating. I spent more time in the pottery studio, perfecting my craft, and I continued writing, each new page a reflection of my journey back to myself. The people at the community center began to notice the shift in me. Emma, always the observant one, smiled whenever she saw me. "You've been glowing lately, Jo," she remarked one morning after a garden meeting. "It's like you found yourself again." I laughed, brushing dirt from my hands. I think I'm finally starting to understand what that means. It's not about finding someone else to fill the empty spots in my life. It's about filling them myself. And that realization that I was enough on my own became the foundation of everything I did. I started taking more chances, accepting invitations to events I would have once declined, reaching out to people I hadn't spoken to in years, and even exploring new opportunities I had never considered. One afternoon, while I was working in the garden, a letter arrived. The envelope was simple, with no return address. I set down my trowel, wiping my hands on my apron as I ripped it open. Inside was a handwritten note. "Jo, I've been following your progress over the past few months, and I'm incredibly impressed by how far you've come. We have an opening for a part-time position at the local arts center, helping organize exhibits and community events. I think you'd be perfect for it. If you're interested, let me know. Lena." I stared at the letter for a moment, my heart pounding. I had never considered myself an arts organizer, but the idea of stepping into a role where I could contribute to the community in a different way intrigued me. It wasn't just about pottery or writing anymore. It was about becoming a part of something bigger, a community where my contributions could have an impact. That night, I found myself pacing in my living room, the letter in my hands, weighing the decision. I wasn't sure if I was ready to take on something so big, but then I realized I had already stepped into the unknown in so many ways. I had faced the fears of loneliness, rejection, and doubt, and I had come out stronger. What was one more step? The next morning, I sent Lena an email expressing my interest in the position. It felt like another leap, but this time I wasn't afraid. I was ready to see where it would take me. A few days later, Lena called to offer me the job. Her voice was warm and welcoming as she spoke about the upcoming events and the role I would play in organizing them. "I think you'll be a great addition to the team," she said. "You've got a fresh perspective, and that's exactly what we need." As I hung up the phone, a rush of excitement filled me. This wasn't just a job. It was an opportunity to immerse myself even more deeply into this new chapter of my life. I was no longer waiting for something to happen. I was making things happen. The following weeks were a blur of new tasks and responsibilities. I spent hours at the Arts Center, helping with event planning, meeting new people, and contributing ideas for the upcoming exhibits. Each step was like another puzzle piece falling into place. The most unexpected part of this new life was the people I met along the way. The connections I made were different from the relationships I had in the past. These were friendships based on mutual respect, shared interests, and a sense of belonging, not the roles we played or the obligations we had to one another. I wasn't just Jo, the mother, or Jo, the widow. I was Jo, the woman who was finding herself again, and through it all, I felt the weight of the years I had spent waiting for my life to change begin to lift. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was living. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing. The days were moving faster now, each one filled with new challenges, new lessons, and unexpected rewards. As I settled into my role at the Arts Center, I found myself not only learning about the art world, but also about what it meant to be a creator, not just of physical things like pottery, but of experiences, memories, and connections. I had become part of something I didn't even know I was missing. A community of artists, thinkers, and dreamers who shared their passion with the world. And the best part? It wasn't just the art that made me feel alive. It was the people. The way they spoke about their projects, the way they encouraged me to contribute, to step into my own light. Lena, the director of the Arts Center, became more than just a boss. She became a mentor, someone who had been through the same journey I was now on. She recognized the spark in me, the spark that had been buried for so long, and she encouraged it to grow. I started organizing events, curating small exhibitions, and even helping artists with their own projects. It was overwhelming at times, but it was also the most fulfilling work I had ever done. One afternoon, as I was walking through the center, I saw a young artist setting up for an exhibition. His work was raw and unpolished, but there was something beautiful about the way he captured emotions through his art. He was struggling to arrange the pieces on the wall, looking unsure of himself. "Can I help?" I asked, walking over to him. "It looks like you've got a lot of work to do, but I think I can offer some suggestions." The artist turned to me, his eyes filled with uncertainty. "I'm not sure if it's ready," he said. "It feels like it's missing something. I just don't know what." I smiled and gestured toward the blank wall behind him. Sometimes it's not about making everything perfect. It's about letting the art speak for itself. Let's step back and look at it from a distance. We worked together, rearranging the pieces until we both felt satisfied. The artist stepped back and looked at the final arrangement, his face lighting up with realization. "It's perfect," he said, a sense of pride in his voice. "Thank you for your help." I smiled, feeling the same sense of pride. "You did the work. I just helped you see it differently." As I left the exhibition that night, my heart swelled with a quiet contentment. The work I was doing wasn't just about organizing events or helping others. It was about learning to see the world and myself in a new way. I was rediscovering the art of living, not just existing. Then, just as I was beginning to feel truly comfortable in this new chapter, Caleb came back into my life, in a way I wasn't expecting. He called one evening, his voice low and hesitant. "Joe, I've been thinking a lot about what we talked about," he said, "and I know I've made a lot of mistakes, but I want to be a part of your life again. I don't expect anything from you, but I want to be there for you. For real this time." I wasn't sure how to respond. A part of me still held the scars of the past, and I had learned to live without the constant pull of his needs. But there was something in his voice, something that felt different this time. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was simply acknowledging what he had done and offering something I hadn't expected, his presence, without the strings attached. "I don't know, Caleb," I said carefully. "I've come so far and I've built something for myself that I'm proud of. I don't want to undo all that." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then he spoke, his voice quieter this time. "I understand. I'm not asking you to change anything. I just want to be part of your life again, if that's something you want too." His words hung in the air, and for a moment I wasn't sure what to say. The past and the future were colliding, and I had to choose how to move forward. I wasn't the same woman I had been when Caleb had last been a part of my life. I had grown, and I had built something strong on my own. But there was room for him, if he was truly willing to be a part of it, not as someone needing my help, but as someone who could simply share in the life I was creating. "I think I'm ready to let you back in," I said finally, my voice steady. "But on my terms, and I need you to respect that." There was a long silence on the line, and then Caleb's voice cracked with emotion. "I will, Joe. I promise. I just want to be there. For you, for everything." I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on my shoulders. This wasn't the beginning of a perfect resolution. It wasn't an instant fix for everything that had happened, but it was a step toward rebuilding something that had been broken but was still worth saving. The summer was slowly fading, and with it came a sense of change I could feel in the very air. It wasn't just the turning of the season, it was something deeper, something inside me. After so many years of waiting, of existing in the shadows of others' needs and expectations, I had finally stepped into the light of my own life. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was mine. Caleb's return had been unexpected, and though I had been cautious at first, I found myself opening up to the possibility of having him back in my life. We didn't jump into anything. We didn't need to. We started with small gestures, shared coffees, quiet afternoons at the park, and conversations that were sometimes awkward but necessary. I wasn't trying to repair everything at once. I was simply allowing the space for us to exist together, without the weight of guilt or expectation hanging over us. At the same time, I had not forgotten the lessons I had learned about boundaries. I had worked too hard to build a life of my own to let it be overshadowed by the past. So I set my terms. Caleb respected them, and I saw something new in him, something that felt real and honest. He wasn't asking for me to forgive him. He wasn't demanding my approval. He was simply showing up, trying to be present in a way he hadn't before. One evening, after a particularly long day at the art center, I found myself sitting on the back porch of my house, looking out at the garden. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting an amber glow across the flowers and plants. It was quiet, peaceful, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly content. A few minutes later, Caleb appeared on the porch holding 2 mugs of tea. He handed me one and sat down beside me. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice soft, "about everything we've been through." I looked over at him, the soft glow of the evening light reflecting in his eyes. He seemed more relaxed than I had ever seen him before. "I've been thinking, too," I replied, my voice steady. "It's been a long road, hasn't it?" He nodded slowly, sipping his tea. "Yeah, and I've realized that I can't undo the mistakes I've made, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to show you I'm different now." "I see it," I said softly. "I really do. But it's not about you changing for me, it's about both of us changing for ourselves." Caleb was quiet for a moment, then he looked at me with a sincerity I hadn't seen before. "I get it, Joe. I've spent too long trying to be someone else, trying to be the person I thought you needed me to be. But I realize now that it's about finding who I am, not just for you, but for me." I smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. For the first time in our relationship, we weren't just existing for the sake of the other person's needs. We were both beginning to live for ourselves, and in doing so, we were starting to rebuild a healthier, more authentic connection. Our conversations, although simple, felt more meaningful. We didn't talk about grand gestures or future promises. Instead, we spoke about the small things, the things that mattered most. The way we had both learned to let go of the past and embrace the present. The way we were finding joy in the little moments, whether it was a cup of tea on the porch or a walk through the community garden. It was the kind of connection that didn't need to be forced. It was natural, and it was enough. The next day, I received an invitation to a local art gallery opening. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was an opportunity to continue embracing this new version of myself. I had spent so many years putting others first, sacrificing my own desires for the sake of family, that now, these small moments felt like a victory. I called Caleb that afternoon. "Would you like to go to the gallery opening with me tonight?" I asked, my voice lighter than it had been in years. There was a long pause before he responded. "I'd love to," he said, a smile evident in his tone. "It sounds perfect." And it was. The evening was filled with art, conversation, and the kind of easy connection I hadn't experienced in years. We moved through the gallery, admiring the pieces on the walls, each one telling a different story. But what struck me most wasn't the art itself. It was the simple joy of sharing the experience with Caleb, no longer weighed down by the past. As the evening drew to a close, we walked out into the cool night air. The stars were bright above us, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope, not just for what was to come, but for what was already here. The following weeks were a delicate dance of rediscovery, of building new routines, and reintroducing old ones that had once brought me comfort. Caleb and I continued to spend time together, but this time there were no expectations, no pressure to make up for lost time. Instead, we found ourselves navigating this new chapter cautiously, savoring the quiet moments that made up our days. One of the biggest shifts in my life had been the realization that I didn't need to rush into anything. I didn't need to force myself to accept things that weren't right. Nor did I have to bend my life to fit someone else's vision of who I should be. I had found my own rhythm, and I wasn't willing to let anyone disrupt that. I had also noticed a change within myself, an ability to say no when I needed to. There was power in that. In the past, I had been a people pleaser, always bending over backward to make sure everyone else was happy. But now, I was learning to put myself first, even in small ways. I remember one afternoon at the community center, Emma and I were discussing the upcoming art festival. She was excited about all the preparations, but when she mentioned needing help with organizing the volunteers, I hesitated. I had been spreading myself thin lately, between the pottery class, the art center, and my newly rekindled relationship with Caleb. I was tired. "Joe, do you think you can help with the volunteers this year? It's going to be a lot of work, but it'll be so worth it," Emma said, her eyes full of enthusiasm. I smiled, but inside, I felt that familiar tug of guilt. I didn't want to disappoint her, but I knew deep down that I wasn't in the right place to take on more. "Emma, I really want to help," I began, my voice steady. "But I think I need to take a step back from extra commitments right now. I've been balancing a lot, and I think I need to focus on myself for a bit." She looked at me, surprised at first, but then a soft understanding crossed her face. "I get it, Joe. You've been through a lot. You don't owe anyone more of yourself than what you're ready to give." It was the first time in my life that I had spoken those words with conviction. I don't owe anyone more of myself than I'm ready to give. It was freeing, and I felt the weight of years spent saying yes to others slowly melt away. Caleb and I had our first real conversation about our future, something we had both avoided for a while. We had been enjoying the present, but the question of what next had been looming. One night, after a quiet dinner at my house, he lingered after we finished the dishes. I could tell he had something on his mind. He cleared his throat, looking down at his hands before finally speaking. "Joe, I've been thinking a lot lately about us, about everything. And I know things aren't perfect, but I want to be here. I want to make things work with you, if you're open to that." His words were simple but sincere, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid to answer honestly. "I want that too, Caleb," I said, my heart steady. "But I need to keep moving forward at my own pace. I can't go back to the way things were. We have to build something new from the ground up." Caleb nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I'm okay with that. I just want to be part of your life, whatever that looks like." We didn't make grand promises that night. There was no talk of forever or vows that we couldn't keep. It was just an understanding, a mutual acknowledgement that we were both willing to try, but not at the expense of our individual growth. The next day, I received a message from Lena offering me the chance to lead the upcoming art exhibition at the center. It was a big opportunity, one that I hadn't expected but had been quietly hoping for. I knew it was the next step for me in this new chapter. I accepted the offer, knowing that I was ready for the challenge. But it wasn't just about the exhibition. It was about me continuing to step into my own, to claim my space in the world without apologizing for it. As I walked back to the garden that evening, the sky painted in hues of pink and orange, I realized that the journey I had started was just beginning. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, but there was also this, the quiet peace of knowing that I was finally living for myself. The garden bloomed around me, just as I had begun to bloom, and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to face whatever came next. The art exhibition came together faster than I expected, each day filled with a flurry of tasks, arranging artwork, coordinating with artists, and making sure everything was ready for the opening night. It wasn't easy, but it was fulfilling. I could feel the energy building as the event date approached. Each moment felt like a small victory. I had spent so many years putting others' needs ahead of my own that I had forgotten the joy of personal accomplishment. But now, everything felt different. I wasn't just filling a role. I was creating, shaping something with my own hands, both literally and figuratively. The day before the exhibition, as I was reviewing the final details, Lena stopped by to check on the progress. She had become more than just a colleague. She was a mentor, someone I could trust and look to for guidance. "You've done incredible work with this, Joe," she said, her voice warm with admiration. "You've truly made this your own." I smiled, wiping a bead of sweat from my forehead. "Thank you, Lena. I've learned so much in such a short time. It's not just about the art, it's about what the art represents, the people behind it. I want to share their stories, not just their work." Lena nodded thoughtfully. "That's exactly what this space needs. People need to feel the connection, not just see the pieces on the walls. And you've created that connection with your vision. I couldn't be more proud of you." Her words resonated deeply. I wasn't just organizing an event, I was telling stories, amplifying voices and building connections. I realized that this was the work I had been longing to do all along. The night of the exhibition was everything I had hoped for, and more. The gallery was filled with a diverse crowd, local artists, curious visitors, and longtime residents of Ash Hollow. The walls were alive with color, light, and expression. The atmosphere was electric with the hum of conversations, laughter, and the quiet admiration of art. As I moved through the space, I felt a sense of pride that I had never experienced before. This wasn't just about the event itself, it was about the way I had stepped into my own and created something from nothing. The hours of hard work, the late nights of planning, all of it had paid off. Caleb arrived later in the evening, a quiet but familiar presence in the crowd. I saw him from across the room, looking at the paintings with a kind of reverence that made my heart swell. When he caught my eye, he smiled, making his way toward me. "You did this, Joe," he said softly, taking in the exhibition around him. "You've built something beautiful here." His words felt like a quiet acknowledgement of how far I had come. I had learned to build my life not based on the expectations of others, but on my own terms. This was my creation, my expression of who I was becoming. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "It means a lot that you're here." We spent the rest of the evening together, sharing quiet moments and watching as people admired the art. It felt like a milestone, not just for the exhibition, but for us, too. We weren't rushing into anything. We weren't trying to fix the past. We were simply existing in the present, finding a way to be in each other's lives again, but in a way that was healthy and whole. After the event wrapped up, I sat alone in the gallery for a few moments, reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. The woman who had stepped into this space a year ago, unsure and uncertain, was now confident and unapologetic in her journey. I had created a life I was proud of. I had learned how to set boundaries, how to say no when necessary, and how to embrace who I was without feeling guilty. As I walked out of the gallery, the night air cool against my skin, I felt a sense of peace. This wasn't the end of my journey. It was just one chapter. The future was still unwritten. But for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see what came next. I was no longer waiting for permission. I was no longer waiting for validation. I had built my own story, and I was living it, one day at a time. The weeks following the exhibition were a whirlwind of new opportunities and personal growth. I was no longer living in the shadow of my past, and I could feel the future opening up before me. The feedback from the exhibition had been overwhelmingly positive, and I had made more connections than I could have imagined. People were noticing my work, not just the event, but the person I had become. One afternoon, while I was sorting through emails at the art center, Lena walked in with a smile on her face. She carried with her an envelope, one I immediately recognized as an invitation to a prestigious art gala being held in a nearby city. "You've been invited to showcase some of your pieces at the gala," she said, her voice filled with excitement. "They saw the exhibition you put together and want to feature your work in their event." I stared at the invitation, my hands trembling. The gala was a big deal, with renowned artists from all over the country attending. To be invited was an honor, but it also felt like an incredible leap into a world I had never imagined I'd be part of. "I don't know what to say," I murmured, feeling overwhelmed. "You don't have to say anything right now," Lena reassured me. "Just think about it. You've earned this, and it could open up so many more doors for you." For the first time in a long while, I felt the familiar pull of fear of stepping into something bigger than I had ever allowed myself to dream. But as I sat there, holding the invitation, I realized that I had already begun stepping into that bigger world. This wasn't a fluke or a chance event. This was a culmination of everything I had worked for, everything I had learned about myself, and the courage I had found to live for me. "I'll do it," I said, my voice steady. "I'll accept the invitation." Lena's eyes lit up with pride. That's what I wanted to hear. The weeks leading up to the gala were a blur of preparation. I spent hours carefully selecting the pieces I would present, trying to decide what would best represent the new version of me. I wasn't the woman I had been before, and my art reflected that. It wasn't about perfection, it was about raw emotion, truth, and growth. The more I worked, the more I realized that I was creating not just for the sake of others, but for myself. I wasn't just making art, I was making a statement. On the night of the gala, I stood in front of the display of my pieces, the elegant venue bustling with people in fine attire. The room was filled with a buzz of conversation, the air thick with anticipation. As I mingled with guests, I felt a sense of calm that I had never experienced in such an environment before. I wasn't out of place. I belonged here. I caught Caleb's eye from across the room. He had accompanied me to the event, and his smile was filled with pride as he walked toward me. His presence had become a steady support in my life, not as a crutch, but as a partner. We didn't need to be perfect together. We just needed to be present. "You look amazing," he said softly, his voice filled with admiration. "Thank you," I replied, feeling a warmth spread through me. It's surreal being here. I never imagined I'd be part of something like this. "You've earned it, Joe," he said, his eyes meeting mine with sincerity. "This is just the beginning." As the night wore on, I received more compliments and interest in my work than I could have anticipated. But what struck me most was the quiet sense of fulfillment I felt in my heart. I had spent so many years looking outside myself for validation, but tonight, I found it within. I wasn't waiting for someone else to tell me I had made it. I knew it for myself. When the night came to an end and Caleb and I left the venue together, I felt a deep sense of peace. We didn't need to have everything figured out, but we were walking this path side by side. And I had finally learned that this journey wasn't just about where I was going. It was about how far I had already come. The future no longer felt uncertain. It was wide open, filled with endless possibilities. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to face it. No more waiting, no more second guessing. I was living for myself, and that was enough.